So, you've been traveling abroad, Brad.
Abroad?
Abroad.
Wish I was traveling with abroad.
Your mom was there.
No one can see my offended face.
I can see it, and that's worth it. That was enough.
I don't think abroad fits my mom's description. Maybe...
the joke was...
Maybe one of those little...
Here's the thing. The joke was, you shouldn't be referring to women as abroad.
I know.
So when I threw it back at you, that feeling you got about someone referring to your mom as abroad should be what you think about when you decide to call women abroad.
But I don't. I never have.
Until just now.
I guess.
And then you did it on mic, it's part of our show now.
I don't think it fits. It doesn't describe a woman to me. Broad. Yeah, see?
Why do you have to say it like that?
It doesn't sound...
Why are you saying it like that
sexy.
Anyway?
Look at that broad over there.
Okay. Why'd you go into the drunk voice? Brad over there.
I think that's what a drunk guy. Hey, Brad. See, now it's me. They're talking to me. That's how drunk people say my name.
Hey, Brad. Then you're like, I'm not a broad.
I'm a Brad.
I'm a Brad.
See, that's what I was doing.
Drunk people like, Brad. You're saying broad? Brad.
You said I was traveling abroad, not abroad.
Yeah, everybody else was traveling abroad. They were stuck with you.
Yes. They were okay. They mostly ignored me and stayed away from me.
That's what I do.
Like they'd made an effort to acknowledge me once during the conversation. Like, hey, you do films, right? You're a filmmaker? Yeah, sort of. What do you do? And then I would say, I make movies nobody wants to watch. And then my cousin Donald said, spoken like a true artist. And for a few seconds I felt cool. And then they went back to ignoring me and talking about God.
Will you do me a favor? Stop referring to our movie as something that no one wants to watch. That's not the marketing angle I want.
That's what my mom said. She said, don't say that.
Don't say that.
But you don't want to watch it.
You don't want to watch it?
But that's the only thing they have to be proud of. Like, well, our son Brad's a filmmaker. He made
yeah.
So that's all they can latch to. Cause
right,
I didn't drop out of high school. My dad screwed up my high school.
What does that mean?
Well, he was America's anti-drug animal. So I was out of school too many days doing his show with him. So...
is that what happened?
Yeah.
I thought you just lost patience with high school. And
I didn't want to repeat the 9th grade, so he homeschooled me. But then was too lazy to do it, and so he had me school myself, which meant I did my own tests. I did very well.
So what you're telling me is the homeschooling system is very flawed.
Yeah. So I did pretty well.
I did pretty well.
But yeah, I got tired of being my own teacher. So then, did the GED, all that shit, then went to tech school. And here I am.
Look how far you've come. And
you
now
can do it too.
And now you've made a movie that no one wants to see.
Right, see? I've made it.
Yeah. Okay, everybody, quiet on the set.
Yay, it's Film Reverie Podcast, take 73. I'm back.
And action. Hello, Film Reverie listeners. This is Michael Beckemeyer, and as usual, I am joined by
me.
Is that your Twitter name now? At me.
At me.
At me.
No. I'm the Ewok.
So this week we wanted to finally come back and give some of our, some of our thinking for when we're making a movie. We've gotten to the point where we want to talk about 3-act structure and screenplay writing. before we've talked about all the stuff that we think about before we ever start writing, like what kind of characters. We gave you the 7-character matrix that we use. We gave you the different kind of matrix, different kind of personality traits and stuff like that we're thinking about when we're creating characters. We've talked about the hero's journey. We've talked about all that stuff. So we're going to today go through basic 3-act structure. And you could find this in a lot of places, but I personally, from the day one I ever wrote a screenplay, I had read Sid Field's screenplay book. And Sid Field's screenplay book breaks down in his philosophy on what a 3-act structure should be for a screenplay. And basically, I'm going to go through it real quick here, and then we'll go through each little point. Anyway, so the first act is anywhere from 25 to 30 pages. Oh, by the way, before we get too far into it, we're going to talk about 3-act structure, and Brad's going to keep us up to date on how that ties into the hero's journey.
Yeah.
Because the hero's journey, basically any of the little points of hero's journey can be pushed or tweaked into any element of the 3-act structure.
Yeah.
But for these purposes today, we're going to refer to one of the best screenplays ever written, in our opinion and many other people's opinion, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. So that's the first one.
Yeah, I also want to mention that when we say pages, basically the way when you write a screenplay, it's formatted in such a way that it's pretty much, it's close to being a page a minute.
Yeah.
So that's how we judge if it's a 90-minute movie, if it's 90 pages or.
Yeah.
So when we say 20 to 30 pages or 30 to 60. Or also keep in mind that means roughly the minutes in the movie as well.
Right. If you have a script that's got a ton of dialogue in it, that script might run longer, but they're running, like our film, Really Pathetic and Totally Awkward, was 115 pages. Mm-hmm. We didn't cut any scenes or any pages out of it when we shot it, and when we edited it, and it came out to be about 89 minutes long, like 90 minutes long. So that's because we had a ton of dialogue. In our script was almost completely dialogue, and if you think about it, dialogue columns on a screenplay are really like a third of the page, right in the middle of the page. Mm-hmm. So you're not really using a whole page. So if you've got a lot of dialogue, even if it's a 10-page scene and it's mostly people talking, you know that's going to normally flow quicker than what the page count would suggest.
Right.
A movie that Brad fell in love with earlier this year was called A Quiet Place. That screenplay was I think I heard that screenplay was 60 or 70 pages because there's such little talking in it.
Oh, right.
The script itself was shorter, but it was still running. I think it was about an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes long as a movie.
So even with the descriptions and the action and all that, it was still it wasn't 90 pages.
It wasn't 90 pages.
Oh.
There's so much quiet time in the film where you're just watching people sign language or whatever, and sign language takes longer than speaking.
Right.
And there's a lot of just quiet moments where things are happening slowly, quietly, and they're building suspense.
So they really had to storyboard to get the timing right on that.
We're not going to do that. We're going to go through our basic structure. If you're going to sit down and write a 90-page When Harry Met Sally rom-com sort of thing, however, When Harry Met Sally is the pinnacle of what a rom-com should be. But what you're looking for. So there's 3 acts. In the first act, it's 25 to 30 pages, and in those first 25 to 30 pages, you have your 10-page setup at the very beginning where you meet your character, you come across the main characters, and basically the world that the main character lives in now before shit starts to hit the fan.
Or what I call the ordinary world.
The ordinary world. And then at around 25 to 30 pages in, I'm just going to briefly run through this real quick, and then we'll go into detail. Okay. So, and then about 25 to 30 pages in, something happens, and it pushes the character into the new world, or he makes a decision. In our Raiders of the Lost Ark analysis here, it's talking about when the Nazis burned down Marion's bar in the pursuit of her father's medallion. Mm-hmm. When that happens, and that shifts, her and him are 2 main characters off into Egypt that's the end of the first act. When that building burns down, that is the end of the first act. When she says, well, now you're stuck with me because I'm your goddamn partner, and she holds that thing out. That's saying the first act is over now. We're going to, and it's a perfect shift from the first act to the second act. If you're analyzing 3-act structure, that's like a strong moment there. Was like, now we're off onto our adventure.
That was what I call it, the call to adventure. Yes.
Actually, the call to adventure is when they come to him and say to him, "Can you go find the Lost Ark of the Covenant?"
Yes.
Yeah.
Was there was also a refusal of the call a little bit, I think. He didn't initially want to go do it. That's usually
right. Well, there's that conversation there in that big library room where he says it's a myth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so then you get into your second act, and your second act, depending on how long your screenplay is, if you're writing a 120-page screenplay, which by today's standards is generally considered too long, you want your screenplay to be around 100 pages on average. It can be longer, it can be shorter. Anyway, what you want to do these days is write a screenplay that's like page turner, and you don't want something that people... A 2-hour movie is a lot to ask of people these days. It's not a lot to ask for me.
But it's also common.
I love 2-hour movies. I love 3-hour movies if they're good. Anyway, so the second act is anywhere from 30 to 60 pages. And it is basically what you would call the middle of the movie, like the body of the film. So if it's an essay, you have your introduction, you have your body, and then you have your conclusion. That's a 3-act structure in terms of like an essay.
I always saw the second act as where everything goes wrong. That's how I sum it up.
Yeah.
But it's the tests, the trials.
Yeah.
The hero keeps trying to. It's where you show that your hero isn't perfect or
I've heard the second act as a writer. I've heard the second act referred to as the wasteland of the second act because it's like a 60-page section where you have to keep it interesting for a whole 60 pages.
It's your job as a writer to beat up your hero.
Right. So inside the second act, so you have around page 30, you shift into your second act, and then about if you're using 100, I'm going to use a 120-page structure here because it's easier to keep track of. About 45 pages in, you're going to have like the pinch, like a pinch number 1. And for Indiana Jones, about 45 minutes into that movie, his first pinch is when he thinks Marion has been killed in that truck that blows up.
What do you think pinch means?
Pinch means, it's like like you said, it's something that goes wrong.
Right.
Or it's the predicament he's in now because of his call to adventure.
Squeeze.
Yeah.
It's making the hero uncomfortable and having to do something about it.
Yeah. For this movie, it's Marion has been killed and he's depressed, drunk, and he thinks everything's gone wrong, and what's the point of any of this anymore anyway?
That would be like one of the tests or trials if you're talking about the hero's journey.
Yeah.
That's like one of the big tests.
So, and then 60 pages in, if you're talking about 120 pages, 60 pages in is the midpoint. Something big happens at the midpoint, like a conflict or something that shifts them further, like a good thing that happens. Like for Indiana Jones, what happens here at the midpoint is he uses the medallion to discover the location of the Ark, and that like reinvigorates him. So he's like, "Oh, I can keep moving.
Right.
I now know where it is," and then does he find out where Marion is before that? He does. He's like, "I know where it is," and then he finds her, and he realizes that she's not dead.
Yeah.
And then he's like, "Well, but I can't rescue right now because then they'll know I'm here."
And then that brings you to the second pinch point.
Yeah, so after the midpoint, he goes and he discovers the location of the Ark, and then that means he goes to where they think the Ark is.
And
she's with him. And then they get the second pinch point which is in the second act again, which you could say that was, let me see here, 30, 45, 60, about page 75. It would be when they are trapped inside the Well of the Souls with the snakes. Asps. Very dangerous, that scene.
Right.
Where they get stuck in there by Belloc. block.
Block.
So that's their pinch point. That's blocking them from getting to the thing.
I liked to think of the 3-act structure and all of this is kind of like, I look at it all as a roller coaster where you're kind of, you're climbing and climbing and climbing all through the second act till you get to the end of the second act, the third act, and it goes down and you get, because you want to build the tension, and then the exciting part is when you go down the roller coaster. So I look at it as that's where when you get into the third act. But I also like to think of all these little trials and tests and pinch points as kind of like little mini roller coasters. Like you go up a little bit, like that was a positive point where he
discovers the location
of the Ark, and then you go back down again, then you go up a little and down. So I kind of like to visualize in my head, okay, we're going up, now something bad needs to happen again. Okay, now something good needs to happen. I mean, you don't have to be that anal about it, but you
need to be working towards something.
Yeah.
So,
we talked about the second pinch point.
Right, so the second pinch point in this instance is Indy. So they get the Ark actually. They steal it back from the Nazis. No, the Nazis steal it from them. Anyway, they end up on the submarine, but then the Nazis find them on the submarine and kidnap Marion, but Indiana Jones hides. Right, so that's the
third plot point.
That's the third plot point. So that's what shifts us into the third act. So about page 90 in Indiana Jones world is when the Marion is kidnapped and the Ark end up with the Nazis. Okay, so that's that. Now Indiana Jones has to go rescue the Ark and his girlfriend.
And interestingly enough, in most movies, at this point in the movie, which it would be in the Indiana Jones, it's 90, which is the normal length of a movie.
Yeah.
But
these days, but back in the 80s when this movie was made, 2 hours was the average. Really? Hour and 50 minutes to 2 hours was the average time for a movie.
Well,
especially big adventure movies.
But most of the time in any movie, when you get into the third act, you pretty much know from seeing movies that this is where everything really goes wrong, or the thing that they've been trying to stop the whole time usually happens. Because what's the fun in building it all up of, you're trying to stop this thing? It's kind of boring if they do stop it and then you never see. It's more interesting when you get to see what happens if they fail and then have to I don't know, defeat it or win the day despite having failed.
So if you're writing a 120-page script like Raiders of the Lost Ark is, somewhere around 120 pages, your third act is around 30 pages. So your first act is 30 pages, your second act is 60, and your third act is 30. However, if you're writing a 90-minute comedy, sort of like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, okay, that's like a 90-minute movie. So your first act would be 30 pages, your second act would be 30 pages, and your third act would be 30 pages. So you just compress the second act there. And then you still hit these beats, but it's like for a 120-page script, it's every 15 pages something's happening. But in a 90-page thing, you just compress things, so it's not so long in between things.
I would compress it more to where like maybe 15 or 20 minutes is the first act, and maybe 15 or 20 minutes in the third act. That way you've got more of the middle part, which is most of the fun. So we got the third plot point. We're into the third act.
Right.
That's where like I was saying, the fun stuff happens, like the climax of...
So you're watching Indiana Jones and you didn't have fun until the last 30 minutes of the movie?
No, but okay, the cool part.
What's the cool part? That's all cool.
When they open up the Ark.
You mean the last 5 minutes?
And the things melt their faces. That was awesome.
So the third act is called, if the first act is called the setup, the third act is, or the setup and introduction, the third act is called the climax. Yeah. It's when stuff starts to climax and resolve itself.
Everything comes to a head.
Everything comes to a head, right. So if you're writing a 90-page script, like a comedy or a rom-com or something like that, or even like a short horror movie, not short horror movie, but a 90-minute horror movie. Your third act is going to be anywhere from and resolution is going to be anywhere from 10 to 30 pages. So, if that makes sense, what you want to do is, we should have said this at the very beginning. Google this, Sid Field screenplay 3-act structure, and there are so many examples of it out there. You could find all kinds of things. Just Google images; they're all there.
You can even find a lot of times you can add a movie that you want to break down.
Right.
Like we typed in Indiana Jones, and some people have already analyzed how it fits in a 3-act.
So there's all kinds of free info out there for you to refer to. However, I do as a writer, I suggest reading at least one book about screenplay structure. There are hundreds of books out there about how to write a screenplay. The standard one for me when I started writing was Sid Field Screenplay. It's just called Screenplay. The other one that's really popular out there is called Save the Cat, and they both have not opposing but like slightly different interpretations of the 3-act structure. Anyway, just read something. You will find something that resonates with you and for you to stick with, and then stick with that. But then also, you got to know the rules and then know when to bend and break those rules.
Yes.
So you might say, really, my first act ends at page 20 because this, and this. And if that's true, if that's really true, it won't matter. But this is just like a roadmap for you to stick to. While I'm getting around page 25 here, I need to have the first act come to an end. It's for you. And when I first wrote my very first screenplay, it was called The Very Thought of You. It was please let this be as good as like When Harry Met Sally, because that was the movie that made me want to start writing. I followed that to a T. On page 25, I had the thing happened. And if I went back and read that screenplay now, I'm sure I would be able to obviously feel that, like this is where they have the big conflict because this has to happen at page 60 or whatever. I'm sure that feels like that, but you've got to do that to get it into your system. Now, when I'm outlining something or I sit down and write something, I look up and I'm like, oh, this is the end of the first act. And I look up, oh, it's page 25 or 30. It's like it's just part of how I outline the thing now. It just it gets burned into your brain.
Yeah, for me, it's as we're writing, I'm visualizing it in my head, so I'll just usually just naturally be like, I'm starting to get bored, or this thing just happened.
Well, you're bored right now. You're bored all the time.
Yeah, that is true. But what we're saying is, at first you gotta, learn the rules.
Yeah.
But eventually it'll just be in there. You won't have to follow down with another piece of paper, first act, second act, and all that.
Right.
You'll just know it because you've seen so many movies. Around this point, such and such needs to happen.
Movies we could recommend to watch, of course, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark is classic. It's probably one of the most flawless screenplays in terms of like structure and having it organically flow. It doesn't feel like you're being forced into things just because, well, it's 45 pages in, this has to happen. But any of the Star Wars movies, particularly the first three, like A New Hope, is a perfect 3-act structure, hero's journey representation.
Yeah.
If you Google 3-act structure Star Wars, it fits it to a T.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can also Google how the hero's journey within the 3-act structure. Like right now, I'm looking at where it puts in the first act, second act, third act.
Is this in reference to Indiana Jones, or is this just? It's just how it ties into the 3-act structure. Okay. So, did you want to talk about how it fits?
Yeah.
How Indiana Jones fits with the hero's journey and inside the 3-act structure? You wanted to do that, right?
Yeah. Well, I want to go through and talk about where the hero's journey. I'm going to do the 12 stage hero's journey that Christopher Vogler did. He condensed the original hero's journey.
Go for it.
But I like this one the best. So maybe you can help me out. So Act 1, the first thing that happens, we talked about it before, ordinary world.
Yeah.
That's where.
It's funny. It's interesting because, in a way, even though Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, can I just say Raiders instead of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Words.
Starts out, he's on a mission or whatever, you know. But that is also his ordinary world, because that's his ordinary world. So his ordinary world is he's out looking for artifacts. He gets busted by Belloc, who steals it from him. That's his ordinary world. And then he ends up back at his college where he's a professor. That's also his ordinary world. So it's cool because if you think about it, his ordinary they do show him in his ordinary self, but he's two different people. He's like got this secret life as a archaeologist, like adventurer, and then also a boring kind of, not boring, but like, you know, a regular college professor. And those are both his ordinary world. And it even has Belloc, which is a great introduction to that character that you think you might never see again, really. Yeah. Until like 45 minutes into the thing. Stealing from him, which is his ordinary world, if you think about it.
Right.
Because apparently that happens all the time with them.
So the next thing would be the call to adventure. What moment do you think?
The call to adventure, I think, in Indiana Jones is when we talked about a second ago, when they, the two British guys come to him and say, "We'd like you to go after the Ark."
Oh, okay, so they come to him.
Yeah, they come to him, and
then
they're
he
asking
thinks it's
him
a myth.
Yeah, and they're asking him a bunch of questions about Abner. What's Marion's dad's name? I can't think of that guy's name. Anyway, his mentor. It was his mentor, actually. In fact, if you're looking for a mentor in Indiana Jones, it's that guy who's not even in the movie, but he learned a lot from that guy.
But then he also has another mentor,
It's
right?
that guy Brody. Yeah,
the
older English. They want you to go for it.
So those are the basic things that happen in the first act as far as your hero's journey: the ordinary world, the call to adventure. Usually there's a refusal of the call. They don't want to do it at first. And you said that's when he was talking about it being a myth?
Well, I think that must be when he's talking about being a myth, because he never says, "I don't want to go for it." He does say...
Does he do it begrudgingly?
He basically does, in that scene, he does say how it's like a magical hocus pocus, like that it's a myth sort of thing, and he's not really saying that he won't go, but he's like not sure it's actually.
I consider the character begrudgingly doing it, not really wanting to, a refusal of a call.
Yeah, but then by the next scene, he's agreed to go, and he's
meet
excited
with
about
the mentor Brody?
Yeah,
in the first act?
it's in the house. The guy comes and goes. They want you to go for it, and he's sitting there packing his bags.
Because that's usually how it happens, is the mentor kind of pushes them the rest of the way and say, go ahead and do it. And then them actually going out and doing it as the crossing the threshold.
So basically when he gets on the airplane and flies to Cairo.
And he's leaving his ordinary world and going into the new...
At the point when we see the first map, where the planes do the little dots, like that's leaving the ordinary world. Right. It's so cool. Like these days, if you show that, it's generally used as a joke. But in that movie, it was like it fit right into the archaeological thing with it's like the map, and he's going from the ordinary world basically to some literally a foreign land.
Yeah,
that is no longer his ordinary world.
I like the visual because it shows you just how far you get a feel of. Oh wow, that's far away.
Far from
you know
home,
what I mean? Otherwise, you're just kind of having to figure that out.
So Act 2. In fact, when you're talking about Pixar, their first act. They say their first act doesn't end until they enter into the new world. Mm-hmm. Like in the Toy Stories, it would be when they fell out of the window and have to go back and get Buzz. Right. That's the end of their first act, whenever that is. So they don't really have a page count for it. They have an incident that happens that pushes them into the new world.
So that's a good point to make.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be how you, wherever you are in your script, how you know you're going from the first act to the second act is when they're crossing the threshold.
Every great Pixar movie has that moment.
Yeah.
If you think about Inside Out, I'm thinking Inside Out. Is Inside Out the one with It's the great one with the stuff going on in their brains.
The different personalities.
Right, so they get stuck off of like imagination land or whatever that land is. It's gonna, and then they end up in this weird thing that they're inside her subconscious.
Yeah.
That's the end of the first act into the second act when they can get stuck there. It's them trying to get back home.
Yeah, they broke things and they're trying to fix it.
Right. So second act, we're in the second act now. We're in the new world.
Yeah. So that's like I was saying. Everything goes wrong, and you have things start to go good for a little bit, and then everything goes wrong, and then a little bit of hope, and then. But
this thing right here is perfect. It says tests,
allies,
and enemies. That's Indiana Jones. He meets that guy Sala, the guy who helps him dig.
Mm-hmm.
Enemies, the Nazis are there. Belloc is there.
Yeah, so that's basically where if whoever you haven't introduced in your first act, you just get everyone together. You get the good guy team together. You have them figure out who the bad guys are, and who's going to betray who. Whatever. You get introduced to everyone.
Approach to innermost cave.
Yeah.
He literally enters into a cave in this movie, and he's got to find the. He enters into multiple caves. Actually, he's got the stream of light that shows him where the Ark is, and then he goes down into another cave to get the Ark. And he gets stuck in the cave in his ordeal. It's like they didn't even bother to write the script. They just it so perfectly fits into the thing.
Yeah, I mean, you could outline your story this way, and so that you generally know where you want to be.
Yeah,
at what point.
The trick is how you weave in and out of these things. It's not that you hit all these beats, but it's how you weave in and out of them in ways that people haven't seen before in an emotional or exciting way that makes your movie great. So it's a lot of people, when I talk to them about 3-act structure, especially students or younger people that haven't written before, they're like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do something that's never been done before. Yes, so do I, but there's a proven structure that you can rely on that will make your completely unique and original idea, like you could say like The Matrix or even Indiana Jones or one of those, that helps you spoon feed that to an audience.
Right.
You don't want to talk down to your audience, but it's like, look, you have your hero's journey. What happens inside that hero's journey that can resonate with an audience? Mm-hmm. So we've got the Ordeal. Which is like, I would say, well, the whole second act of Indiana Jones is an ordeal. But we could even say, at this point, what we were talking about, the ordeal could be he's stuck in the cave and he's got to get with the snakes and he's got to get out. Yeah,
I was going to say, at some point, they've got to. Now, metaphorically, it means where you confront yourself. Mm-hmm. Well, like in, what was it, the second Star Wars movie? Luke literally went into a cave and the mask came off Vader and he saw himself. Yeah. So Lucas decided to be literal with that, but yeah, basically so in this instance it would be the snakes because that's his greatest fear. So he's confronting a part of himself that can immobilize him, or he's got to conquer that fear in order to progress in the story.
Yeah. I hate snakes, Jack. I hate them.
Yeah.
Oh, come on. Show a little backbone, would you? And he's in the airplane at the very beginning. First of all, if a snake ended up in my lap, I would not be showing backbone. I'd be cursing more than Indiana Jones was.
That's some scary shit.
That's just my pet snake, Reggie. All right, so the reward in seizing the sword.
Which then he found the Ark.
Yeah.
But then it gets taken away.
Yeah.
I like to think of the end of Act 2 as kind of like the false ending, because there's sort of a resolution.
Yeah.
And the good guys think they almost win, but there's always the rug gets pulled out from under them. But it's called now. The end of the second act, going into the third act, is called The Road Back. But that's really where they think they've won. They think they're good.
Right. He thinks he's. For us, Indiana Jones thinks he's got the plan. I think I know how to get this back from them.
Right.
Yeah. And he ends up on that submarine. where he sneaks in, and it really does feel like at that point, if you go and watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, when he swims from the ship to the submarine, and he sneaks on and gets that the Nazis like uniform,
right.
It really does feel like maybe the movie's coming to an end, because it feels like he swam across this thing. He has this big majestic moment when he's standing on top of the submarine, and he's like, and he waves to the guys on the ship. He's like, "I did it, guys! Like, I'm gonna go in here and get the Ark, and this is gonna be over soon."
Right.
But that doesn't happen, because we have literally another 30 minutes of Indiana Jones left, where he
they get captured, don't they?
He
finds the girl, and then they get captured, and
right.
the bad guy gets the Ark.
Right, it's when he's he tries to get the Ark from them. He tries to hijack one of the little trucks that they have.
Right.
And when he fights everybody, when he's fighting everybody and throwing people out the window.
Yeah, there's a tank too.
Yeah, there's a tank.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but then what happens is they still get it from him, but he disappears again.
Yeah.
And then later he shows up with that rocket launcher or the bazooka,
right?
And he's going to blow up the Ark. Basically, that's what shifts us into like the final resurrection. Like
right.
he's resurrected. Like they think he's dead. Remember, they think he's dead twice in this movie. And the resurrection right here is, which is part of the ordinary.
Of Act 3.
When we've returned to the ordinary world in Act 3.
Yeah, there's always a metaphorical death and rebirth.
Yeah.
Which would be like the killing off of the old self and the birth of the new. In other words, like conquering your fears or whatever it should be.
So they think
this is a sort of a literal resurrection where they thought he was dead.
Yeah, and they thought he was gone. They thought he was dead. And now he's up on a ridge with a bazooka going, "I'm going to blow up the Ark if you don't give me the girl."
Yeah.
So he resurrected, like, because they thought he was dead. They thought they were done with him. And that's when they capture him and tie him to the post with Marion. And then they have, like, what you called the cool stuff there in the last 5 minutes of the movie. Yeah.
Now, well, this is called so after the cool stuff, then there's the return with the elixir or whatever it is.
He returned back to wherever he came with the Ark, because he finally got the Ark.
What did they do with the Ark at the end? I don't remember.
They put it in a big warehouse with everything else.
Yeah.
It says top secret American property of America or something there at the end. Yeah. So it's still sitting in that warehouse somewhere waiting for Indiana Jones 5.
It would have been interesting if they had done something with that instead of the stupid glass alien heads. Oh, stupid.
Here's the thing. Even though that movie wasn't, we generally don't like Crystal Skull. People generally think that wasn't the world's greatest Indiana Jones movie. It still fits the 3-act structure.
Yeah.
The hero's journey. It
was a copy and paste.
Yeah.
I forget which Indiana Jones movie, but it was like, all the way down to the Jeep, the car chase scene. It reminded me of Lost Ark so much. It seemed like they were copying and pasting from the successful Indiana Jones movie and just putting skulls in there instead.
Yeah. So this doesn't cover like tropes of any genre or anything like that you have to, when you're writing a horror movie. There are horror movie tropes you have to be aware of and work on.
Yeah.
So my advice is to grab a copy of this 3-act structure somewhere. At bare minimum, grab a copy of this 3-act structure if you don't read the book, and watch a movie. And keep track. That's what I used to do. I would keep track. 25 minutes. Oh, that's the first act, and I would write it down. I'd make notes for myself so that I would, so it would start to sink in a little bit. Chinatown is a great movie. It's a great movie anyway. See it anyway, but it's also got great 3-act structure. It's very well written script. Indiana Jones, particularly the first 3, I think are worth watching again anyway. The Matrix, even though that's longer than 2 hours, it's a longer than 2-hour movie.
My favorite movie of all time.
But there's also, I mentioned Star Wars before. George Lucas is real big, and George Lucas was basically he was in charge of and wrote the first three Star Wars movies. Those are the ones they knocked out of the park. real big on 3-act structure and the hero's journey.
Hero's journey.
So watch any of those movies to really get a good taste for it. But then watch any kind of movie. Like When Harry Met Sally is a great movie. It's got great 3-act structure in it. It's just a different thing. It's a little shorter. It's got more of a 90-minute to 100-minute long. I think it's a 98-minute long movie. So it follows the shorter 90-minute structure a little bit, so that you can get a taste for what that's like. But if you know what you're looking for, you can dissect these movies pretty easily. Just by watching them and keeping an eye on the different beats that have to happen.
Yeah.
And it makes you analyzing things in general, even if you didn't know any of this stuff or weren't aware of any of this stuff, just watching a movie in an analytical way will make you a better filmmaker. It's made me a better filmmaker. It hasn't really helped Brad much.
But I tend to watch movies and shows related to the subject matter that I'm currently working on, because I will. It helps me to not get stuck, because I'll get inspiration, and there'll be scenes or moments where I'm like, oh, I forgot about that. Something like that needs to be in the movie all the time. So I sort of just keep like an open window in my mind of looking for more. What do you call it? Not influence, but inspiration for whatever scripts we're working on.
So maybe what we can do is, we don't really have a download for this episode, but we do have links we can post I'm going
to put a couple of the pictures up so they could follow along with the 3-act structure, and then I'll put a couple of links.
Yeah. So that's it. Next week we will probably be back with an interview. We got a couple lined up that some exciting interviews. We're looking forward to talking to people. And until then, if you have questions for us, we are no experts. We're figuring this out as we go along too, but we've been doing it for a while and we have picked up some knowledge. So if you have any questions, please email us. We'd love to hear anything anyone had to say about this stuff and have a conversation, because ultimately I feel like conversations I've had with people over the years are what has made me a better writer, as much as just writing.
Yeah.
Because talking to people about things, even just talking to people about movies, somebody says something, you're like, oh, that's right, that's great, and then you like that sinks into your writer brain, and then it it sits in there and waits for it to be used. Yeah,
it is true. It's we could call it sharpening the saw.
Yeah, sharpening the saw.
Yeah. It's always good to. You never want to let your passions, like wilt away. You gotta, and even just having conversations with fellow filmmakers will help keep it sharpened. Yeah. I don't know, your passions, your intellect.
Sharpen the saw.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Keep your wits about you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's it for this time. We hope everybody enjoyed. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. Why did I say stay tuned?
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Like you're what? To be continued.
Don't change that dial.
Don't change the dial. Same time, same place. We will see you again next week. Until then, go make something.
And of course, the end. Again.
And cut. Film Reverie Podcast is a production of Super Mega Ultra Entertainment and is produced by Michael Beckemeyer and Bradley Kingston. If you're enjoying this podcast, please be sure to leave us a 5-star review in iTunes. And visit filmreverie.com to listen to past episodes, and be sure to click like or subscribe wherever you find us. That's it for this time. We'll see you again next week with another episode of Film Reverie.